Hi, Trevis. Great to see you. Looking fit and healthy after a very hectic week. You're just back from ECTRIMS.
I am
So,
indeed. I don't feel so fit and healthy
do
for
you,
it was it was massive.
how many people would be at it actually? So it's ECTRIMS. It was on in
It,
Copenhagen, first of all, I
it
suppose.
was. It was on Copenhagen. It was the week of, I couldn't even give you the dates now, but it was
Mm.
last week from when we're recording this. But ECTRIMS is the European Committee for the Treatment and Research in MS. And ECTRIMS and ACTRIMS, American Committee, are the big ones. But there have been a number of them. There's one in Australia, there's one in Iran, there's one from Russia, and we just added Africa. So this is big, bigger than I was expected. I've been into these sort of research things before, the American Academy of Neurology, etc. But there were 8,000 researchers, MS professionals. That's nurses and psychotherapists and neurologists and researchers, etc. They're all there. I mean, and just to give a sense of the gravity that this event held on the opening plenary session, um, the group was asked to stand and went completely silent as Her Majesty the Queen of Denmark was escorted in to attend
Wow.
this thing. So this was about as big an MS event as you're going to find in the world.
So that was probably your first big event like this, post-COVID. Did you notice that? Like that, was it tiring even being around so many people?
It was to be around that many people who are all striving
Yeah.
to cure our disease and help us live better with the disease was it was exhausting, but it was more invigorating than on an intellectual level. Certainly, physically, I was shattered by the end of it. But I mean, just to give you a sense of the thing, there was one hall where there were over 1,200 new research posters that were put up, and every day the young researchers, usually young, were standing in front of these posters, and they were talking with the researchers who are at the next level up in the research chain, if you will, as well as to neurologists from around the world and MS nurses, et cetera, and explaining what they were researching, what these initial findings were, et cetera. And these are young people mostly who are coming up. They're master's students, their doctorate, their postdocs who are doing this work. In fact, one of the really exciting sessions that I sat in on, and I couldn't even remember which day it is. I think it was day two. Um, uh, it was about remyelination. So this is the stuff where, MS strips away the myelin sheath, the insulation of the wiring of the brain. Well, they were talking about the trials and the setup, et cetera, of trying to work on remyelination. And I don't think any of the 6 or 8 people presenting were over 30. So we've got really bright minds that are attacking these issues for us. And just to talk about how complex that is, imaging the myelin sheath, is next to impossible right now without biopsy, and most of that's post-mortem. So before we can really talk about fixing the myelin, we've got to figure out how we can see if a procedure or a drug is actually working. So that's how deep this thing goes as we try to, stop the disease in its tracks, perhaps, maybe reverse some of the damage, and hopefully, possibly, and stop people from getting the disease in the first place.
And we'll do a little breakdown of each day, but
Sure.
I just wanted to ask you first about, you mentioned, I asked you about highlights and you mentioned the new McDonald criteria for a diagnosis. So that I remember you talked about it actually, and actually just to mention that to people that you did little daily reports where your enthusiasm for it really shone through, and we'll put that up on our YouTube channel with this one. But that McDonald's criteria, that was sort of the big one that jumped out for you.
That
McDo
certainly was because, and this is particularly for people who are early in or just before being diagnosed right now. I know a lot of us have been living with the disease for years or maybe even decades, but the revised McDonald criteria, and just so people understand, that is the system by which neurologists can determine whether or not what they're seeing clinically and pathologically through imaging, et cetera, if it is MS, where they've changed that, or the recommendations are to be changed. And this is the top level thinkers in MS around the world that are getting together. And so what they're doing is the likes of, and I won't get into all of it, but if if there's one lesion but no, or multiple lesions but no clinical symptoms yet. Used to be well, you had to wait until there were clinical symptoms to go along with those multiple scars, if you will. Now that can be considered MS. Or if you've got clinical symptoms but only one lesion on an MRI, that's probable MS now as well. So to be treated like MS. They're also looking at different biomarkers that might be able to lead even a GP towards a diagnosis of MS, or probable, using blood tests, etc. So there's loads of new things. And as we all know, it's important, the earlier someone is diagnosed, the sooner they can be put on an MS disease modifying drug. And all of the research at this point says treat early, treat aggressive. Don't just go with one of the old drugs first and wait until someone breaks through. It's get them on something frontline first, and we can extend that period of time before possibly disease progression and disability sets in. So that's really important for, if you will, the next generation of MS patients.
And that's always been so topical, hasn't it? The speed of diagnosis, and getting diagnosed quickly. So does it speed it up as well as getting it early? Does it also speed up the process?
Well, that's the hope. Certainly,
Mm.
if it used to be, if I, presented a symptom, but I only had one lesion on my brain or my spinal cord, they wouldn't call that. It would be a clinically isolated syndrome, and you would have to wait, and it could be 6 months, it could be a year. We all know how long it takes to get in to see a neurologist or to get an MRI, and how dear that can be. So the ability to diagnose it faster, because what they've done is, over the years, they followed those people who had one lesion but symptoms, and looking at the type of lesion it is as well. Now MRIs are so good that they can see different types of lesions. So if it's a particular kind of lesion, almost no doubt it's MS. So we can go forward, and it's very topical, and it is very important.
And I suppose the next thing that you mentioned was the area around breastfeeding and pregnancy. There was some
Yeah, I
breakthroughs
said
there.
I mean, here I am, middle-aged guy sitting in on these pregnancy and childbirth and nursing, etc. I think that's in breastfeeding, not being MS nurses. And there were two major sessions for MS nurses as well. But things like it's beginning to appear that, and some guidelines will come out soon, that a woman could stay on her disease modifying drug while breastfeeding. So for so many people and women who are thinking about getting pregnant, it's like, all right, well, when do I stop my disease modifying drug before getting pregnant? And how long after postpartum can I start my meds again? Because we often see that there's a little bit of a honeymoon during pregnancy, but then a rebound after. So there's in the pipeline, and it'll be very soon, there will be recommendations on a lot of the different medications for that. So that's really important for a lot of people. And it was many of the sessions. One of the things that I was really impressed with, that neurologists and physicians from around the world were then able to go up and ask questions via the microphone. And how do I put this? You've got the people who the person with MS is considering their learned person, their neurologist, the person that's treating them. And that person then can go to one of these events, and they can talk to the leading experts and researchers in the world and say, I have a patient who is X, Y, and Z, and this is happening, and this is happening. And there'd be four panelists that are the international leaders saying, well, you know what, you're doing the right thing there. Also look at this, consider this, what you might think about doing. So it was often we see our neurologists as infallible, and they know everything, but they're out there constantly looking for new answers and looking for help. And even walking around the sessions, you would hear I mean, I don't know how many, I ran into Alan Thompson, and I ran into Professor Gavin Giovannoni, all these people just having chats with other people. Hey, professor, what do you think about this? And so it was just brilliant to see that kind of professional hunger to treat the patients as well as possible from the people who are treating us on a everyday basis.
And you mentioned MS nurses, so you bumped into Kira, isn't it, who used to be
It is so
MSME?
many people within MS
Yeah.
Ireland and the MS and Me blog community will remember Kira O'Mara, who blogged for us for a number of years. She had stopped blogging because she was getting very busy. She's now a lecturer at UNIG in nursing, and she does a lot of work. She's not an MS nurse particularly, but she's a nurse with multiple sclerosis and a research nurse as well. So um, I ran into her and we talked about what she had seen in the MS nurse process. Things like if a person has an MS nurse, their outcomes are significantly and objectively better. I don't know exactly how many MS nurses that we have in Ireland, but I know that in Australia, 50% of the patients have access to an MS nurse, which is amazing. And one of the things that the nurses were focused in on as well was what they called disease modifying behaviors. So not just the disease modifying treatments, but nurses are holistic in general as how they treat patients. So they were talking about things like diet, like exercise, and the importance of all of those things in a healthy life with multiple sclerosis. Uh, there's a lot of research that's looking into the gut microbiome and all that having to do with diet. The thing is, whatever you choose, do something. Reduce your fat. Go vegetarian a few days a week. Change up your diet, do intermittent fasting, whatever you're doing there, do something and do something exercise wise as well. So there was a lot going on from the MS nurses area as well. It was really impressive. It was lovely to see Kara, and then she sat on, and I'm sure we'll get to the final day in the afternoon. It was a patients community day, and she sat in on one of those panels as well.
And actually, that's we will go into it now because that was the thing that we were sort of pushing for people within the MS community in Ireland because you could actually go onto that online and watch it. So, how did you find that day? Because that was, I suppose, the would probably of most interest to people
You
within.
know, the MS Society of the UK came up to me afterwards and did a quick little video asking me what one word would describe that day. And this was 20 minutes after the session had finished, and I was seated, waiting for my next thing that I needed to do that afternoon. And I just said that the one word was buzz. And literally, half an hour after the event was over, sitting at the table, I had to speak up just to be recorded because there was just such a buzz in the room, literally. But figuratively, there was a buzz because there were two different panel groups, and there were about 200 people. No, I'm sorry, 500 people in person. And then there were over 2,000 people online who were watching. These are people with multiple sclerosis. And the panels consisted of the president of the National MS Society in America, the president of the European Committee on Treatment and Research in MS, professors and researchers from Sorbonne and great thinkers in our business, and MS nurses and psychotherapists from all over the world. So to be able to be in that room, either literally, actually there physically, or to be there virtually was really something special for people living with MS. And I believe that video is still something that's available that you can go back and I'm sure you'll find
Mhm.
the link there. And then also right after that, I was sitting waiting for my next thing. So about an hour after that was done was my final event for the week. And that was sitting in with yeah with Brett from MS Translates, and he was doing interviews and podcasts for ECTRIMS. So I was sitting in with him and talking about the importance of patient stay, etc. So that'll be probably next week before that goes live, but we'll make sure that we get you a link to that as well. It was a very, very full week, certainly. I mean, we talked about pediatric MS. That was a big one. In addition to the diagnostic criteria that I thought was really big. And then there was a late breaking session at the very end where some of the latest research, particularly into MS drug treatments, was announced. And there was some good news. There was some bad news. There were some expectations that were met and expectations that fell far short. But yes, as a person living with MS and who's lived with MS for over 30 years and has been writing about living with MS for nearly 20. Sometimes even though my master's work was in food science, was science still, I was sitting there and I felt like a baby bird with my mouth open, and the mama bird researchers were coming and they were just trying to throw stuff into my mouth, and half of it was missing my face because it was just so top level. But what was nice is now I can go back into recorded sessions of recordings of all those sessions and really mine through what was there and have some things. So what I'll probably do in the next week or so, as I'm doing that, is I'll write a piece for MS Ireland with some links so people who want to go deeper into those things can, because certainly I mean, at times there were 6 or 8 sessions going on at once, so there was not a chance that you could take it all in.
Yeah.
But it was I'm wicked tired still. I'm recovering, and it was a trip, wouldn't you know it, that I forgot my Provigil, my modafinil. Not a trip for that. But even though I am and was shattered, I mean, you can hear the excitement in my voice and my demeanor, because
Totally.
what was being discussed there is the stuff that will change MS. And there were things I hadn't heard of even. There was something called NMOSD and MOGAD, MOGAD. I can't remember what they were acronyms for, but these are also demyelinating diseases, usually diagnosed early in life, or the symptoms come up early in life. And for a long time, they were misdiagnosed as MS. And this was the whole focus, these two diseases, of the pre-day. It was the first pre-day where they could talk about this. And for someone living with MS, you might think, well, why is it important for an MS conference to be talking about these two diseases that aren't MS? Well, one is because they are in some ways like MS. Another way that they might, some of the treatments that you might put people on with these diseases for MS actually makes the disease worse. So that was one of the ways that they could figure that it wasn't. But more importantly for us with MS, if you take these two conditions out of the MS circle, the circle gets smaller, and the researchers can get closer and closer to figuring out how better to treat MS, how better to diagnose MS, and get to the point where we are talking about ending MS, either stopping it where it is, as I talked about remyelination, reversing the damage, or there was talk about the Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, and vaccinations, etc. And what came up, I suppose, most important from the patient's day, when all of these researchers were sort of chopping down the research that they had put out in an hour-and-a-half session into a 10-minute soundbite, really, for the patients, was that a lot of these things that are coming along are going to be here in years, not decades. So this isn't something,
Wow.
and everything's moving faster. Even these new drugs and new molecules used to be 10 or 15 years before these things were going to come out on the market. What they're saying now is, with better diagnostics and better design of the research, it can come out faster. They can test for things. They can look at things on a molecular level within the patient that they didn't used to be able to do. So a lot of these things that someone in their 50s or 60s, like I am, who's been living with MS, used to think, well, that's for the next generation. It's very possible that while I'm still actively living with MS, that some of this new stuff might just very well be there for me before my MS, kind of burns out.
Did you? So, like it was 3 days then, as you say, there was so much going on. So rather than break it down, because you've covered a huge amount of areas, was there anything else from those 3 days that sort of jumped out that you wanted to mention?
Well, first off, thanks to MS Ireland for flying me over there so that I could do this and get the information out to everyone. I suppose one of the things that might be most important is everybody puts their pants on like one leg at a time, and I was in the smallest hotel room I've ever been in my life. Now, I've never been to Japan in those sleeping pods, but my hotel room was wee. But the number of heads of MS organizations from around the world and researchers, et cetera, that were there staying in my hotel. This wasn't some sort of, a tropical retreat that these people were going to. It was the kind of thing that people were there to share their knowledge, to gain more knowledge, to make connections for the next things that happened. I was able to make some connections, and there are some exciting things that are in the works for for me and for what we might be able to do with the MS community. So I suppose the one thing that was the takeaway, beyond all the science, beyond beyond Her Majesty the Queen coming in and seeing her walk, 2 rows away from me, was that the people who are treating us were there to work and to learn and to pass on their information and to take home more information. So when I was diagnosed 30 years ago, 20 plus years ago, whatever it was, I remember someone saying, if you have to have MS, this is the best time to be diagnosed with MS. And boy, maybe up to that point, but right now, the amount of research that's going on in the world of multiple sclerosis treatment and therapies and research toward the cure is mind-boggling. So if we have to live with MS, first off, it's better than the alternative because it's an incurable disease at this point. But the research that's going on and the researchers that are doing it are passionate. It's really quite something.
As you say, you're a buzz from it, and just let people know that we'll put up the links to the ECTRIMS to their website. You can get information about it. People want to do a bit of research, but also I'll put up a link to your podcast when that comes out. That'll be down below as well. And also, I'm going to put up a link actually, just while I'm talking to you, give me an idea to put up a link to our national conference this year, actually the MS Ireland National Conference, because in a way that's a smaller version of what you were talking about. And you kind of described perfectly why people should go to the MS Ireland National Conference. It's on the 7th of November, and I'll put a registration link down below for people for that, because you're with like-minded people, aren't you?
You're with like-minded people who are trying to live their best lives with this disease. And as I said, I ran into researchers that are at the top of their game that I have seen before at the national conference from MS Ireland. So the conference that you put on brings in these people who I just would have seen at ECTRIMS. So yeah, everyone attend. I'm looking forward to attending myself. So I am.
Well, thank you so much for that. And just my last question then is, did you get a chance to see any of Copenhagen, or were you just too busy?
It's funny. In a way, it's funny, and in a way, it's sad because the events were so jam-packed. I literally would walk out of my hotel room and up the street. I suppose it was maybe about a mile. And I was slow. Then went into the conference, spent all day at the conference. While it was something simple, they fed lunch to everyone as well. And then I would lead the conference and go kind of continue along the rectangle of the square where I was, maybe find a restaurant to get a takeaway, and then go back to my hotel room and eat and digest what I had got from the day and make my notes and then go to bed. All I saw was about a 2 square mile block from my hotel to the conference center and back. So no, I didn't get to, but from what I did see, I think Copenhagen is going to be a beautiful city to holiday one day.
Yeah. Well, particularly for you, you're a bit of a foodie, and it's well known for that, isn't it?
I'm told it is, but I couldn't tell
Yeah,
you from this trip. That's for certain.
exactly. And you mentioned earlier on that you're going to kind of do a little article as well. So I once that comes out, I'll also have the link down below for that as well. So I want to thank you for everything. As I said, your enthusiasm was infectious for all those daily reports that you were giving us, and we really appreciate it from MS Ireland.
Well, Fergal, I have to tell you, for you particularly, and for MS Ireland in general, what you do for the MS community and what you've done with the podcasts and the webcasts, etc., much appreciated. I know that people recognize me from the unspeakable bits while I
Oh,
was there.
wow.
So what you're doing at MS Ireland is reaching around the globe. So well done.
Excellent. I love to hear that. Well, take care. Thank you.
All right. Cheers.